final panelist, before we go into some questions, is the fabulous Olly Church. And Olly is a former British officer who has fought in Afghanistan, and through his own personal journey of recovering mentally and physically and dealing with PTSD, is now an emotional coach and helps businesses with their mental fitness and resilience. And we're starting to talk about this coronavirus thing, aren't we, as a war against the virus. And quite frankly, without putting too fine a point on it, there are very few people that are in our universes that have actually fought a war, and Olly is one of them. So Olly, over to you.
Thanks very much, Julia. So it's interesting, isn't it? So everybody will be running out their business continuity plans at the moment. So they'll be saying, okay, sort of go and work from home, and that's great. But I think one of the things that most organizations will miss off is the psychological impact of doing that and mitigating the risk around that. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I think the reality is a lot of us will have worked like this before, but nobody has lived like this before, have they? So considering that I'm the last one on, I knew that I was going to be pushed for time. So what I'm going to do is just share some slides with you, just so that nobody has to take too many notes, and we'll disseminate these afterwards so that people have got the information. Can you see that now, Julia? The slide's up. Okay, great. Good. So really, I want to follow on from what George and Joe were talking about. So we know that as well as fear, we're going to be feeling all these sorts of different emotions in us at different times. It'll come and go. And so the one that I pick up on there particularly is anxiety. So again, very normal reaction to these circumstances. But what we need to understand is when it goes from being normal anxiety to being actually a disorder. And that's really when it starts to get in the way of daily functioning. And that's when we should start to seek professional advice. And as George alluded to earlier, all these are common, but they're reversible. So we need to know that actually these are not going to last forever. That sense of permanence is something that we need to reject from day one. So what we might see in ourselves, in our teams, in our families is this dip in mental health, because many of our coping mechanisms and our protective factors that we rely on a regular basis just become far more difficult to maintain. So it comes back to this idea of structure and routine. So what I've got up here is the mental health continuum, and hopefully we all strive to stay in the green. So again, normal mood fluctuations, and we've got a huge host there of signs and symptoms that we can start to look out for. And it is quite normal actually to move from the green into the yellow. So again, just bouncing in and out of there is perfectly normal, especially now. What we need to look out for in ourselves and other people is that we're not staying in the yellow and that we're not transgressing onto the amber or the red. And I'll talk about later some resources that we can use. But essentially that's about keeping an eye on ourselves, keeping an eye on each other. What are we behaving like? What are these thoughts we're having, so that we can start to seek professional help if we need to. So to come back to this point earlier about what can we do, I'm not going to give you a long list of healthy habits because they're going to be different for everyone. But what we need to know is that there's a huge impact of not being able to achieve these three most powerful needs as human beings. The first is this sense of control. So actually think about what you're going to do to establish control, whether that's a bit of just understanding what you can control and influence and what you can't, and making some decisive actions around that. The next one is this feeling of competence. We all need to feel capable and effective. So what are you going to do on a regular basis, which helps you achieve that? And then finally, this one of relatedness. We need connection, we need support. So again, how are you going to factor that in a professional and a personal capacity? So what are the key stress risk areas? In a professional commercial setting, we know that demand, control, support, relationships, our role, and how change is communicated are all absolutely fundamental. And this, if we get these wrong, is where stress tends to show up. The thing we need to know now is that all these have changed, okay? So we just need to understand how we re-baseline these and how we move forwards together when we're working as a team. Because what we're really striving to achieve is this resilient mindset that in these different and difficult times, we can embrace challenge. we are willing to experience negative and positive emotion and understand that both will come. We can remain in the present moment, and we can maintain the self-confidence to continue. So we know that our mental health doesn't happen by chance. All sorts of things will influence it. Some make it worse, some make it better. And some of them we can control, but a lot of things are outside our control. So essentially, mental fitness and resilience is about balancing those risk and protection factors. And I'll come on to some resources very shortly where we can get more detail about that. But a sense of awareness and influence will help us keep on top of these things. So what do we do when we're leading a team? And again, this is not just work, this could be the family as well. We need to set the tone. We need to plan for the long term. We need to stop and think. Again, all the other speakers have mentioned this. We need to take the time now to get a sustainable approach sorted for the next few months. We need to think about what we're doing on a regular basis as a team and as a leader. And then finally, we need to involve the team in planning. So essentially establishing buy-in, whether that's the family or our team at work. And we need to make sure that actually we are focusing on the individuals rather than the task necessarily. We need to build that trust and make sure that psychological safety is there. People feel free to make mistakes and to learn from them. So finally, what I would suggest is a master habit, my key tip, talking about this mindfulness thing. I'm a big fan of mindful stoicism, the ability to stop, to breathe, to reflect on what the options are and then choose. This is all about making sure that we can choose our responses rather than just reacting. And then I'll finally just bring to your attention a couple of really useful resources. First of all, the HSE put together a really good risk assessment. Again, work through that with your team. Don't assume that you know what they're going through. And then next of all, Mental Health First Aid England. They've got a really good line manager's resource, which will provide plenty of advice and information for you, for your team, and you also for your family. And it'll help us to understand how we can keep an eye on people. And it gives us a huge amount of understanding around mental health, which will help us to combat the fear and the lack of understanding, which quite often leads to inaction. So I know I've gone over time, Julia, but again, very keen to send these out to everybody who's attending.
Thank you, Olly. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you. And loads to digest there, and having those slides will help us digest. It's important to process, isn't it? And this is a fantastic thing to do. We've got so much information that we all need to process, and that's, you know, one of the great advantages of having this software, that we can record it and send out the recordings so that we can all dip in and revisit the things that we haven't been able to process in time to sort of take on board. But I love that, and the element of being in control, that's for me so huge, is that so much right now is outside of our control. You know, I've got A levels, you know, I've got 3 boys, A levels are up the creek, GCSEs are up the creek, so that's 2 of mine. Another one having situations, he's a sound person, having situations that he's being affected. My father's in hospital. There is so little that we're in control of. And so for me to be able to run this and to offer this to people was my being able to be a little bit in control of something. So thank you for that. That's absolutely brilliant. And the fact that, you know, the point about us being leaders at home is so key, isn't it? You know, we haven't been through this before, and our children are seeing how we're dealing with it. And it's, you know, we're setting an example, and we're leading them as well. So absolutely key. Thank you so much, Olly. That's brilliant, absolutely brilliant.